Thank you for patiently going through all of those passages of Scripture, and especially thanks to Woody for making it easy to get through those passages of Scripture with that, presentation voice that he has. And thank you also to the choir. It sounded like you guys have practiced that song. It was very nice. I don't know, that wasn't a left-handed compliment. It's me. What can I say? Back left-handed comment, huh? All right. Well, I'll try to get serious here for just a few moments. I'll try. Well, as you know, this week we learned of the death of Nelson Mandela in Africa, South Africa. Known as a great peacemaker in our time in the tradition of Martin Luther King and Gandhi. But did you know that when he was born, his name was not Nelson? Did you know this? Now, I know I'm going to mess this up. His name was something like and I'm just sorry, I can't say it, but the translation of his name means troublemaker. And in his young life, Mandela was an angry man who led a violent movement against a very evil and violent regime. And then he was, arrested and put on trial and placed in prison for 27 years. And over that 27-year period, something happened in his life, and he changed his approach to the need of change in South Africa. And as we think about these great peacemakers in our time, Nelson Mandela, by the way, he had a teacher who gave him that name, Nelson. And as we look over his life and the tremendous, beautiful story that is, as we look over the life and the witness of Martin Luther King and of Gandhi, the truth of the matter is the peacemaker model that they showed to be so powerful was really only an imitation of the message of Christ, especially that is found in the Sermon on the Mount. And when they learned to turn the other cheek and not to resist an evil person, and if someone asks you to go a mile, go two, and so on, they discovered that there is a greater power operative in the universe than violence. But as we read these passages of Scripture, or as we listened to them being read to us, and as I prepared, and I should mention the call to worship from Isaiah, also part of today's lectionary, there were two things that really, really stuck out to me about these four passages. Number one, someone is coming and you better get ready. And the second one was this tremendous repetition of the words justice and righteousness. I don't know if they struck you, but I encourage you to go back later in the day and read and see how many times in all four of these passages justice and righteousness are repeated. Isaiah 11, 1 through 10 speaks to the coming of the Messiah and that he will reign in justice and reign in righteousness and bring justice. Psalm 72, that Woody read first, speaks of his judging with righteousness, settling scores, and putting things right. In Matthew, we read about John the Baptist with his very fiery rhetoric and his no compromises and no holds barred approach, warning the people to get ready because the time of the Messiah is at hand. And in Romans 15, 4 through 13, Paul talks about how the Messiah brings parity between Jews and Gentiles. When we read these texts, if we're not careful, we may actually expect a very violent and aggressive Messiah to come. But what we learn from the life of Jesus, who embodied this principle, is that, once again, there was a power greater than violence. This week, as I was reflecting upon these passages of Scripture, I was listening to the metal god himself, Rob Halford, you know, the founder of Judas Priest. You know what I'm talking about? Some of you guys know what I'm talking about.
I know Judas Priest.
Do you know Judas Priest? You know, Rob Halford, in his later days, he actually, oh, got the horns back there again? He actually came back to his faith. And he recorded a Christmas album, which I was listening to and enjoying very much in the car, rocking out with the volume up kind of loud. And as I was listening to it, I was struck. He does my favorite Christmas hymn is "O Holy Night." As only Rob Halford can do it. By the way, he's not just a screamer. He has a 6-octave range. And I was struck because, you see, there are certain things you can communicate with different types of music. You know, like country music, you can communicate patriotism and adultery and drunkenness, you know, and pickup trucks, and yeah, that's right. And I'll admit that I like Willie. I'll admit that.
Oh, he's the best.
And in rock and roll, you can, you know, promote all things. Well, metal can project things like power and glory and magnificence and judgment. And I was just struck by the words, the third stanza of "O Holy Night." Truly he taught us to love one another. His law is love, and his gospel is peace. Chains shall he break, for the slave is our brother. And the last line just hit me. And in his name all oppression shall cease. When we sing these kinds of songs, and when we read the kinds of verses like we read, talking about the coming of a Messiah to judge, we may get the idea that we're just supposed to sit back passively and wait for it to happen. And then when nothing happens, we either lose our faith or we just push it off a little further into the future. What I think we need to learn is the same lesson that was learned by people like Gandhi and Martin Luther King and Nelson Mandela. And that is maybe summed up with that old slogan, if it's to be, it's up to me. It only happens when we follow his example. And when it doesn't happen, it means that we are not doing our job. You see, Christmas is not just about, I just offended Alan and Son. I'm kidding. They told me they were leaving. You see, the mandate of Advent is that Christ has already done his work. The completion of that work is up to us, the church. We are the ones who are supposed to bring justice and righteousness. That is our responsibility. We are here in the world to do it. And you know, the images that are presented to us at Christmas time are usually, happiness, and we hear some new nebulous term in these Hallmark Channel movies like the spirit of Christmas, right? And we watch The Miracle on 34th Street, but we know, as Terry and Beck experienced last night, that there is another side to reality. Homelessness, excuse me. Well, there is homeliness too. You know, some things you just can't help. Sorry, I'm a little, sinusy here. Yeah, I think so. There is that homelessness. There is, even at the birth of Christ, the slaughter of innocent children perpetrated by King Herod. And these words from Isaiah keep coming back to us. And you notice how even in Romans, Paul quoted from Isaiah. And I had kind of to switch gears here, and I don't have a very natural segue.